Hello everybody and welcome. Today we're going to be doing Cubase Basics 101. Today I'm using Cubase 12, which is the latest version. This should all be very similar for users of Cubase going back to version 8, 7, 6. I started using Cubase in 2003 with Cubase SX2. And the stuff I'm going to be showing you today, I don't think has changed at all. A lot of the advanced features have come on a long way. It works a lot better with more modern systems, but the way that Cubase works in general has been very similar for a long time. So I'm going to be using the 30-day trial of Cubase. Now they've updated it, you don't need their e-licenser dongle anymore, which is very helpful. But that means that I can get this going on my MacBook. The setup is exactly the same on a PC, and you can do this however you like with whatever machine you like. It should work pretty well. I'm Adam Steele, and this is Hot Pole Studios, and I'm usually known for using software called Reaper. I also do use Cubase quite a lot, and I've been known to use Pro Tools as well. There's a video on that too. But if you are more interested in Reaper, I do have a full course, the Ultimate Reaper Guide. The link is down in the description below. Now, before I start using Cubase, I would recommend, highly recommend, that you have some kind of audio interface. You don't necessarily need one. You can kind of scrape by just using like inbuilt headphone outputs and that kind of thing, but you really should have some sort of audio interface for good enough audio quality that you can hear what's going on. Very high quality microphone inputs, that kind of thing, very high quality guitar inputs so you're not dealing with noise and so you're not dealing with horrible delays, what we call latency. I'm using the Audient ID44. Which is a very nice premium kind of interface, but you don't need to use something so big and expensive. You could use something like this little ID4, which has one microphone input and headphone and monitor outs and a guitar DI, far more affordable. There are affiliate links in the description for both of these and a couple of other things as well that I'll mention in the video. In America, that's with Sweetwater, and in Europe, that's with Thomann. That means that I get a little bit kind of help from those guys in return for letting you know that these are good stuff. And I genuinely believe they're good. You'll see me using these all the time. I'm not some sort of sponsored person. So on we go. First thing we're going to need is to actually download Cubase. So I've gone to the Cubase trial page, which at the moment is Steinberg.net because Steinberg make Cubase /Cubase/trial. And of course, I'm going to click sign in. I'm probably going to have to create an account because I've not had an account for Cubase in a decade. I have used boxed copies before, and usually when I'm working at other people's studios, I use Cubase a lot, but I tend not to use it in here. So let's sign up. There we go. So there's download for Windows, download for Mac. I need to download it for Mac. And that would be the download assistant. So I'll have to log into that. Now, another couple of things that I'm going to need, as well as the download assistant, which will, of course, tell me that I can install Cubase, will be the drivers for the audio interface and drivers for my iLok, which you may not need, but I do need because I use other plugins that work with Cubase that work with that system. Now, I am using one of the newer M2 MacBooks, but if you've got an older Intel MacBook, Cubase works perfectly fine. If you've got a PC, Cubase also works perfectly fine. If this hasn't been changed over to the Apple Silicon stuff, which I think it has, at least it would work in Rosetta mode, so it's going to work either way. So I'm clicking open the launcher so I don't have to go through all the login detail things over and over and over again, which is kind of nice. E-licenser control will be their new dongle-less security, which means that I'm going to need to install their new software-based security stuff, which is fine. All right, so my product downloads, there's Cubase Pro 12. So I'm going to click install on that. There are lots of other instruments like Halion, Groove Agent, Spectra layers, which honestly I'm not going to download pretty much any of these today because I don't really need any of these to show you how Cubase works. Although, shout out at the bottom, Cubase 12 demo project by Mendel Beidelai. He's a friend of mine. So that's really cool that that's included with Cubase 12. Good job, Mendel. There we go, and that's installed. And that installed significantly faster than Pro Tools did, I can tell you that. Now, moving on, before I open Cubase up, let's go and get the drivers for our interface, because if you've got an interface, you need the ACO drivers. I know that a lot of people think that, especially with Macs, you can just plug an interface in and it will just work. That isn't really the case, because what we need is the very latest software from whoever makes your interface, whether it be Audient, Focusrite, RME, PreSonus, whoever it may be, which is the kind of the bit that goes in between Cubase and the interface itself, so that they talk the most efficient way that they can. So you get the lowest latency, less chance of dropouts. You'll usually get things like a mixer that you might need with your particular interface to do things like direct monitoring or not, which we'll come back to. But yeah, get the drivers. In my case, I'm going to audient.com because this is from Audient. I'm going to their products and ID 44. Then down to downloads, and then getting the latest macOS drivers, click that download, get them installed. And then also, like I said, for the iLok, if you're using an iLok for your other software, now's a very good time to go to iLok.com and get the latest authorization manager from there. Get that installed so that if you've got any plugins you want to install that use that system, that will then talk to those when you fire up Cubase, and everything will begin to work as it should. Cubase itself doesn't actually use iLok, unlike Pro Tools, so you don't actually need this if you only use internal Cubase plugins or plugins from companies that don't use iLok, like say Plugin Alliance, Acoustica, Waves. They're probably the big three that I would think of that don't use iLok. There are others, there are quite a few others, but yeah, it's worth mentioning at this point, because if you fire up Cubase and you have any plugins that, let's say you've installed them for Pro Tools or another DAW, and there's no iLok software installed, you'll run into problems right there and then. So that's now installed. Let's go into our applications folder using Finder, and we will go to, it's not under C for Cubase, yes it is, Cubase 12, there it is. Let's double click on that and get going. Now that did say Rosetta 2, so we need to activate by signing in. We can open that through the, there we go, trial. There we go. That can now be dismissed. Now where is Cubase? In the background somewhere? Loading up. There we go, and in the background it is finding all of my plugins and is reading them all for the first time, which does take quite a long time if you have external plugins from other companies. Then you may find that this takes a significant amount of time while you get through this again for the first time, and then it's usually much quicker after that. Alright, now we've got through the effects loading portion, which again shouldn't take too long for you. We've got this window, which is to ensure you actually hear audio from Cubase, select the driver. So for us, Audient ID 44 is what we have plugged in. You can on a Mac use built-in audio. The microphone is not going to be very good quality, but the inbuilt audio, you'll be able to hear something, and that's kind of reasonable. But yeah, definitely choose your interface if you've got one. And then it gives us loads and loads of kind of stuff that's quite overwhelming. What I like to do is go to the bottom right of this page and create an empty project. So I'm going to use prompt for project location and hit create empty. And that's giving me a choice of folder. I'm going to make a folder in documents called Cubase 101, but you can do this anywhere. And hit open, project folder CB 101, create empty. And open, there we go. And we have a blank Cubase project that we can begin working. Now, the first thing that I'm going to want to do is make sure that my project is set up at the sample rate I want to work at. So that would be under project and project setup. At the bottom here is sample rate and bit depth and record type. I tend to use 48 kilohertz, 24-bit and wave file record type. It is possible to use 44.1 kilohertz if you're recording for CD format, which is rare these days, but happens. 48K is usually what we choose for TV, film, YouTube, anything that might be associated with video. And even a lot of modern audio album productions tend to be done in 48. That's what I tend to work at. And then there is also more exotic stuff like 96K, if that works for you. But if you're not sure whether you should use those, don't. And you can always research on why you would want to use them and what's good about it for you. In fact, I'm making a video very soon, if not already, about working in 96 kilohertz. Long story short, don't worry about it. If you're working on something that's going on YouTube or streaming, I'd pick 48K and hit OK. Next thing that I'm going to want to do is hit save as and call this something like, I don't know, Cubase 101 version 1. And then every time I do a major milestone in a project, I like to then save as and then set or use save new version to do a version 2, a version 3, so that if I've ever made a mistake at any point, I can go back to the older versions and find out what I did wrong and go back and see if I can salvage whatever mistake I might have made. Now, the next thing that I like to do in Cubase is set up my inputs and outputs. And that's something that isn't really done by default because you can get quite kind of picky with customizing things. So if we look in the studio menu at the top of that here is audio connections. And you'll want to open that. And the first two tabs are inputs and outputs. Now, this interface has like 20 something inputs and 20 something outputs. But right now, our inputs and outputs are set to stereo in and stereo out. So they're not really using the rest of it. What we're going to want to do is add all of our buses in here. So if I add buses, this has got, let's say that in mono, we want 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's just go with the first 4. So I'm going to add a count of 4 of these configurations, mono, bus name, and I'm just going to call them input because when I hit add bus, that's going to call them input 1, 2, 3, 4. And these have automatically been added as mono, except that the stereo in was already taken with 1 and 2. If you want to change any of these, you can drop down by clicking where this says analog 3 over here. So in device port, we can choose which one of these we want to use. So we can add loads and loads of these. We can make them mono only, we can make them stereo. This is really useful if we're doing, say, surround sound recording because you can pick which inputs make a surround sound input. That's something that is really useful if you're doing some clever like 3D and VR stuff. Similar with outputs. Quite often I do a lot of what's called guitar reamping. So I might have a reamp mono that is like analog output 3, that kind of thing. I might have an extra add bus here where I go to stereo and have headphone extra. And then that might be using analog 7, analog 8, maybe. But you can define as many of those as you want in this audio connections box. And then later on, when we come to making tracks in Cubase, these will all be available to you to choose from. Okay, so now we've got Cubase open, we should be able to get some sounds. And what I'm going to do is show you how to make a track and play back a file first, so we know everything's working and so we know we can hear stuff. And let's say that you've got a backing track already and you want to record on top of that. This is what you would do. So the first thing is this big blank area over here is where our tracks go. So if I was to right click in this area, it gives me a whole load of different track types I can add. And the first one we want to add is add audio track. Now I want this to be a stereo track, and we're using the first stereo, and that doesn't matter. And I'm going to call this track. Why not? And then hit add track. And there is our first track. We can take the bottom, that make it bigger and smaller as we so desire. And so now we have a track that we can put our audio on. And so I'm now going to add something to the media pool and then bring that into the project. I'm going to go to Media at the top and Open Pool Window. The media pool is where all the audio goes when it's not currently on the project, but it's still in the project. So there's an import button here, which I can use. If I hit import, I can find something, probably in my Dropbox. There we go. I'll just pull in a WAV file from a previous project that I did, hit open. And so it will give me a set of options. I can copy the file to the project folder, which I highly recommend you do, because then if you save everything in one folder, then if you move this to another computer or you put this archived on another hard drive somewhere, everything is in one place. That way, you're not going to open it months or years later and go, where have half the files gone? Definitely recommend doing that. And then convert to project settings. If the file that you're pulling in is different in terms of sample rate to your original project, then you're going to need to tick this box so that everything comes in correctly. You can also split the channels if you so need, but that's not something I'm going to do here, and I'll hit OK. That has now converted that, and I can now drag and drop that straight onto my project. And by default, on the left here, we can see that this is going out of our stereo out. If I hit play, we should hear this. And there on the left, we have a volume slider that we can use to make this louder or quieter. Not the most convenient thing in the world, but there is a whole other window I've not even talked about yet, and that's the mix console. So if I go right to the top and go to Studio and Mix Console, this brings up this window. This is the Mix Console. I'll make it larger so it covers the screen so we're not looking at anything else. Now we can see on here different meters for the different inputs. We've got our track, which I called track there. We've got stereo out and all the different outputs that we defined in the audio connections there. But yeah, right in the middle is something very important, and that is our audio track. If I hit spacebar to play, we can see our different levels there. And we'll come back to this in a minute because we've got things that we can do with effects. We'll get back to that. Next, I'm going to look at recording some audio. Close this window down. And so I'm going to make myself a whole new track. I'm using the G and H buttons to zoom in and out in Cubase. But right at the bottom right of this, there is also a little slider you can use. And there are probably shortcuts you can use with mouse as well. But I don't tend to use the mouse for that. I just use G and H to zoom in and out. If I right click and add another audio track, I'll make this one mono. And this one, I'm going to use input 1 because input 1 currently has a microphone plugged in. And that is plugged in here, microphone port 1, the gain is turned up. And so the stereo out is there. If I hit add track, we'll now see that's come up. Now, if we want to hear that, there are two ways that we can do that. Number one is next to this little record button, which is record enable. That needs to be armed for this track to actually record anything. Otherwise, it's just going to play it back. Next to that is a little button that we call monitor, which goes yellow, and that should now be live monitoring. And so we can see that's now a live monitor. If I go back to the mix console, you should be able to see that somewhere. 1 2 1 2 1 2. Hey hey. Hey 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 hey. Hey hey. Turns out I was being silly. Where it says input 1, that's where I've named them badly in the studio connections. Watch out for that. What I actually wanted was stereo in left, because that, if we look again at our audio connections and inputs, analog 1 is coming in stereo in left, and the one called input 1 is actually number 3. That's my fault. Make sure you name all of your inputs and outputs properly so you don't get that kind of confusion. But yes, this is now coming through the system. You can see the meters going, and if we open up the mix console, you can see that's now coming out of the stereo out as well. It does have a very slight delay on it that's called latency, which is because this is going through Cubase, through any processing we might be doing, and that takes a tiny little bit of time to get through there. If we alternatively want to do this with near zero latency, what we can do is untick that monitor so that that meter will now completely die off, and we're not hearing that through Cubase, but we can go into what is our ID app for this audience interface. And this is very similar for any interface that you might have, whether the brand is a different one. It might be a slightly different system to this, but you can see there are faders here where I can bring up the fader on this input 1 that we can see the meter. That will not be processed though, so any effects that we would add in Cubase are not going to be applied as we hear them. They will be applied after the fact though, if we do it this way. If you're hearing a kind of a doubling effect that sounds like a weird kind of chorus, like a robot kind of effect, it's very possible that you've got monitoring enabled in Cubase and enabled here at the same time. So you need to decide which one you want and turn one of them off. Let's record a little bit of audio here. 1 2 1 2. I'm making audio. I'm making an audio file in real time, a 1 2 3, a 1 2. And so I can play that back now. Audio. I'm making an audio file in real time, a 1 2 3, a 1 2. Now I'm hearing that through the monitors very quietly. I've also got headphones plugged in here. You might need to change your headphone routing in your interface depending on where you want the sound to come out of. Also, fair warning, when you are recording or playing back audio, make sure your volume is kind of lower down to begin with, just so you don't blow your speakers out and then bring it up to taste, just so that you don't end up starting at maximum and watching your speakers explode. Maybe not explode, but you know what I mean, kind of cause you to jump out of your skin with extremely loud noise. Another thing I should mention at this point is mute and solo. I'm going to move this audio by just clicking and dragging so that now these two will play at the same time. Something I should mention is if I click on this bar at the top where the numbers are, that's the transport bar, and that where I click on it is moving this line that goes up and down the screen, which determines where, when I hit play, well, I'm hitting spacebar, it's going to play from. So it doesn't necessarily play from the beginning every time. So I'm going to play that from where now both of these are going. And that's a bit of a mess. Now, if I want to hear just that vocal and I don't want to hear the backing track anymore, I can mute the backing track. If you look on these tracks, they've all got M and S next to each other. If I hit mute on that track, that means now that's not going to play. 1 2 1 2. I'm making audio. I'm making an audio file in real time, a 1 2 3, a 1. And if I unmute that, then we get it back. 1 2 1 2. Alternatively, I can use solo. Now, if I've got loads of tracks going on in this, maybe I've got 10 drum tracks and loads of other guitars and things. If I just want to hear what one thing is doing, then I can hit solo. And that will have just that track play. If I hit more than one solo, it will play just those tracks together, but it will temporarily at least mute all the other tracks. So by clicking that solo again, that will clear the solo and we'll be back to hearing everything again. A cute little thing that helps me in Cubase a lot is if I've got a very busy project and I'm wondering why I'm only hearing one or two things, if you look at the top left, we can see that M and S are muted and soloed, lit up at the top. And if I click on the solo at the top, that will clear the solo for everything in the entire project, no matter where I am. It's a really nice shortcut. Another thing we can do is looping. Let's say that I want to hear this vocal part over and over and over again. I mean, I don't know why you'd want to, but let's say you've got a bit that you want to go round and round and round. On that bar at the top where we decide where we're going to play from, I'm going to click right at the start of this and just drag from left to right a little box, and you can see it's lit up blue. That is now our in and out. Now at the bottom we've got stop, play, record right in the middle, and next to them is activate cycle. So they don't call it looping in Cubase, they call it cycle. Now if I hit play from the start, that will go to the end of this little cycle and play it back from the start again and again and again.
1 2 1 2. I'm making audio. I'm making an audio file in real time. A 1 2 3 a 1 2. 1 2 1 2. I'm making audio. I'm making an audio file in real time. A 1 2 3 a 1.
Make sure you are saving regularly. Now it's time to talk about MIDI. I've just pulled out this big MIDI keyboard here. You definitely don't need something quite so big and scary in terms of using MIDI. You can put MIDI information in just using a keyboard, or you can use a tiny little two different types of keyboards. You can put MIDI in using the mouse and computer keyboard, or you can use this kind of controller keyboard. And this is a USB MIDI controller keyboard. So this has a USB socket that goes straight into the computer on this dock. Traditionally, MIDI used this round kind of 5-pin interface thing, like so. This is an old Motu MIDI to USB interface. So you would have MIDI keyboards with their MIDI out that would go into one of these ports. This will be connected by USB into the computer. This is one that has 5 MIDI ins, 5 MIDI outs. That's overkill for most home studios. But you can use something like this. This is a controller keyboard. It's called a controller keyboard because it doesn't actually make any sound of its own. This has nothing but MIDI messages going into Cubase or whatever software that you want to use. There are a lot of, let's say, home pianos that have MIDI capability, and those are amazing, but what you'll have to do to use this the way I'm going to use it is turn your volume all the way off on that keyboard, because we're not using the inbuilt sounds from any of these devices, at least not the way I'm doing it. But that's always an opportunity if that's something you want to do, but that would be using that as an audio device and you would capture that into an interface. MIDI is a whole separate thing. MIDI is basically just a few numbers. So if I hit a key, that's going to send a message to the computer that says, play me that note, which in that case I played a D. It will tell it how hard I hit the note, and immediately it will make that play. And then when I let go, that will send a message saying, okay, stop playing that note now. And that's it. That's all this actually does. It's got a few more things, like it's got pitch bend wheel and you can put a pedal in for expression, all that kind of stuff. But they're just numbers. They're just messages. So what we have to do is convert that into something we can actually hear. First things first, in Cubase, I'm going to add a MIDI track. So right click in this blank space, add MIDI track, and I'm going to call it test, count 1. And so from MIDI inputs, I don't like using the all MIDI inputs, but I closed Cubase and opened it again after plugging this in, and this is a Keystation 88. So I'm going to select the input as Keystation 88, port 1, because port 1 is just a weird quirk of this keyboard. And now when I'm hitting the keys, you can see meters going. That's not actually an audio level. That's just telling us how hard I've hit a key. And showing us that basically this is working and that's how it will go. So if I hit record, then you will see as I hit some keys that we get MIDI information. However, we're not hearing anything because this is just a set of numbers. That's great and all, but doesn't really help us right now. So I'm going to delete this track and I'm going to instead add an instrument track. And I'm going to choose an instrument from this list. Now, what did Cubase come with? Because a lot of these are instruments that I brought in. I didn't install any of the instruments that come with Cubase, but you can install any of them that you happen to like. In this case, instead, I'm going to go with Arturia's B3. That's going out of stereo out, and I'm going to call it organ. Now that's come up here with our virtual organ. That's from Arturia. I bought that separately. I'm going to close this window down because we don't need to see it. And I'm going to input monitor it like we did with the input monitor earlier and make sure that the input for this is that key station 88 port 1. And this should make noise. So there we go. That now is an instrument track where if I hit record, we will hear that. Very nice. Now, that was recorded without any kind of metronome, and that's not something we've talked about so far. So let's talk about that. A metronome is, or otherwise known as a click, is something that keeps you in time. And by default, Cubase opens up with its tempo at 120 BPM. And the reason for that is it's a nice, easy 2 beats every second. So it's just a nice, easy default to go 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2 with the clock. Now, if we want to hear that, now I have to go to the bottom right and activate the click with that button or the C key. Now if I hit play, we can hear the click. And so I can record to that. And make a mistake, of course, but hey, that's in there now. And from there, I can go back and play that. Now, a cool thing about MIDI is, like I said, it's just a bunch of messages. So that little grrr mistake that was in there, we can see it. We can see these notes going up and down as I played them. I double clicked on the item to open this up. And I can see 2 notes at once here, because left to right, this is the MIDI information as it came in. So we can see if we read it left to right, it goes da 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 da. And you can see from the color how hard I hit it as well. So there's a lot going on. And then here I can see 2 notes at once going blur. So what I can do is select the one that's not very nice and hit the delete key, and that's gone. So if I hit play again, and I can select any note I want here, drag them around. And I can drag them around to be anywhere. I can drag the ends of them to make them longer and shorter. I can move them to be earlier or later. So if there's 1 or 2 notes in an otherwise perfect performance, you can just massage it a little bit. You know, it's fine. That's part of what this software is for, I think. Really, it's to do with, you know, making sure that everything is as good as it can be. We're all human. Now, this is taking up a lot of my screen space, the editor. If I go to the bottom of it here, there's a little X, and that little X will close that down for now so that we get our screen real estate back. Looking back at the audio for a second, although this does actually work with MIDI as well, let's say that this piece of audio is okay, but it's a little bit early in the performance. I can drag it left to right, right to left, and make that later or earlier. That's something that I can do that's nice and easy. That's snapping to the grid right now, which means it started recording exactly on a bar and it's moving it exactly by a bar. If we look at the top, there is the grid setting right here, which I can untick, and now this will move freely. So if, say, a piece of audio was slightly early or slightly late, I can now move it. Let's say I don't want to move the entire piece of audio though, I want to move a little bit of it. To do that, I'm going to have to split it. And the way to do that is we look at this bar at the top. And there are loads of different tools here, but one of them is the split button. And now if we hover over, I can now click exactly where I want to split this audio, and that will make it 2 pieces of audio. And now I can move them completely separately from each other. Let's say I wanted to do this and add a gap in between these words.
1 2 1 2.
We're still hearing the click. Let's turn that off with the C key.
1 2 1 2. I'm making audio. I'm making an audio.
So now there's a nice split. But let's also say that I wanted to fade in and fade out this second piece. What I want to do, as I hover over it, you'll see a load of little squares in the corners appear. The squares at the bottom mean that I can make the start and end of this a little bit longer, a little bit shorter, but the ones at the top are to do with volume. So I can bring the top in on either side to fade this in and fade it out. And then the other one in the middle is the overall volume of that clip. So I can make that a little bit quieter if I need to. So those are splits, trims, and fades. Now I'm just going to make these tracks a little bit smaller so we can do something else, and that is add effects. Effects are great. It means that you can use things like equalizers if the sound isn't quite right, compressors, things like reverbs, delays, choruses, anything you can possibly imagine. They're all at your fingertips. A lot of these really cool effects are inbuilt into Cubase, and if those don't do exactly what you need, somebody probably sells a third-party plugin, usually known as a VST. That's the plugin format for Cubase. That works with it, that can do exactly what it is that you need. I've got far too many of those external plugins. My kind of mixing life revolves around them, but you don't have to do that. That's kind of next level kind of stuff, but that's entirely up to you. The way that I'm going to apply effects, firstly, I'm going to open the mix console. So we've got in the middle here our track, our audio, and the organ. Let's say the track needs some sort of compression. That would be under inserts at the top here. So if I click on inserts, that drops down where the effects would be. And there's a little down arrow, and I can choose from an absolute ton of effects. I've got loads because most of these, like I said, are the third-party ones that I bought that have been installed. But let's see what we've got in the dynamics, because dynamics is where things like compression live. Oh, I've got an absolute ton of them. But let's use the vintage compressor, which I think, yeah, that's a Cubase one. And now that's open, I'll hit play. There we go. And by changing the settings on this, this is now compressing the audio on that particular track. We can see the meters move. And that's exactly what I wanted in this particular case. You can mess around with that, but the way the inserts work, they go in between the input, which in this case is our file, and what we hear out of the speakers. It's literally inserted in between them. So all of the sound from the file goes through this, and then all goes back out towards, in this case, the speakers, but you can do other things if you want to send that sound to a group, or that's next level stuff. And so that worked super well. And as I added one in there, it added a nice blank underneath in case I needed to add something else and something else and something else. And as you add inserts, it goes from the top and goes through each one by one by one by one. and the order in which they occur affects the order in which your sound gets processed. So if you want to use an EQ, then a compressor, it will do them in that order from top down. If you flip them round, it will compress the audio, then EQ the result of that. It's all mathematical, really. It's exactly the same in the real world with the hardware. We go from one piece of gear to the next piece of gear to the next piece of gear in a line. And that's how inserts work. Now let's say I wanted to add a reverb, but I wanted to add the same reverb to the backing track, to the vocal, and to the organ. It's quite common. It's something I do every day in mixing. We call it mixing with effects buses or sends. Back to our edit window here, I'm going to right click in the blank space and add an effect track. Now, you don't have to add an effect right away here, but you can. I'm going to make this a stereo track and I'm going to add a reverb. And I'm going to add Roomworks SE, why not? And that currently goes out of the stereo out and I'm going to call it verb. So if I add that track, that has now added that reverb and I can change the settings as needed. If I open the mix console, then we can see that's added that reverb as an insert on this new verb track with the purple fader. So even things like reverbs, delays, that kind of thing, they are all inserts at some point. Now, the way that I opened those effects is probably worth mentioning is that if I hover over the bar, there is a little E for edit. And if I click that E, that brings up the window for that particular plugin. That's the same anywhere in Cubase. If you need to deep dive into something that you can't see, there's usually a little E icon somewhere, and you click that E icon and that will bring up more details. Like at the bottom right here, we've got the click. Right next to that is an E button, and that brings up loads of different details about the click. You'll see that everywhere you go in Cubase. Any details you need, you'll find that E somewhere. So, from the mix window, we've now got, oh, look, there's inserts again on the track. There's just a different way of looking at the exact same thing we saw in the mix console. But if we look at our backing track and there's a sends window here, I can add in a send here just by clicking down. And where it gives me a choice, I can now send some of this audio out to somewhere as well as the main output. So if I click on verb, that's now sending this track to the reverb as well as out of the main output. So if I hit play, this is going to be very reverby. It will be very reverby as soon as I activate the send with the top left icon there, of course. So that's very reverby, and we can slide the amount up and down here where it says 0. I can make that more or less. If we open it up in the mix console, we'll see exactly the same thing. Under sends, there's a little blue light. If I click that, that drops that down. And now we can see the reverb being sent from the track. Now, if I go into here and add reverb sends for the audio and the organ, I can enable those too and have different amounts of those being sent to that reverb, which is something that I find really useful because then I can use the same reverb, but then have something that's more reverby, something that's less reverby. But then, why would I do that? Because I got asked that last time I talked about this. Firstly, I now only need one copy of the reverb, which means that my CPU isn't taking a hammering. But also it means that if I want to change the sound of that reverb, that affects everything all at once, which can be a massive time saver. So that instead of having 10 different guitar tracks with all different reverbs on, I can have something where they all sound like they belong together. But then if I need to change something, I can do it for all of them and not just one of them. And I'm not spending hours having to go back through every little effect when I can do it this way. Now if I go to the audio, reverb,
file in real time, a 1, 2, 3, a 1.
and same with the organ. So that's how we get effects. You can do that with reverbs, delays, anything that you like. A lot of people do crazy things like parallel compression, all those kind of things. That's how you would do it using Ascend. So there you go. We've talked about quite a lot in this video, but hopefully that's enough to get you going producing music in Cubase. I am going to make more videos about this in the future, deeper diving into things like effects, routing, virtual drums, some of the clever things that you can do with Cubase that really bring it to life with the next level kind of stuff. But for now, this is everything. So if you want to show your appreciation, you can always support us on Patreon. So massive thanks to all our current Patreon supporters. Your names are going down the screen right now, and it's a massive, massive help. Supporters, you can check out the Pro Mix Academy courses I've made on the basics of EQ, compression, delay and reverb, what different types are and why they're important. The links for that are down in the description below, because getting to grips with different types of that kind of stuff can really help your mixing fundamentals come on leaps and bounds. It's the kind of stuff that took me years, and I really wish that that had been there when I started. But you can now get that as a course. Thank you everybody for watching. I'm Adam Steele, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye everyone.